It's now 2 past, at least according to my clock. So let's kick this meeting off. So welcome everybody to what is the kickoff seminar of Upright's brand new program called Net Impact and EU Sustainable Finance. My name is Annu. I think we met with most of you at least virtually at some point, but I'm the founder and CEO of Upright for all the new friends who I haven't yet had the pleasure to meet. And I will be facilitating and hosting this session today, together with my colleagues Toni and Eero, whose faces and you will soon see, or probably see already now. Okay, so what is this program about? Why are we here? The Net Impact and EU Sustainable Finance is about having honest and straightforward discussion among investors and companies about what the new EU sustainable finance regulation concretely means, what it changes and what it does not change when it comes to reporting your impact. And quite importantly, not just what it means and what the data looks like, but also how investors and companies should now take this new regulation, how they should work to fit the new regulatory data to the overall context of their other increasing impact and ESG efforts. I know many of you, if not all of you, have been increasingly working with impact and ESG in the past 5 to 10 years, and especially so in the past couple of years. So it's a good question also to ask, what kind of role does the EU data play here, and what remains the role of the other impact and ESG efforts that you're working on. And this program is also not just about discussing and waving our hands, but to concretely producing the data, the required EU taxonomy and SFDR principal adverse impacts data to all of you participating organizations. To see what it looks like, to discuss together what this data says about your organization and what other maybe more holistic impact measures are needed to tell the impact story more holistically. Cool, but I'm going to now share my screen to help give a little bit of structure to the session and also introduce what we are doing today. So let me just here share my screen and actually put on back here so that I can see also your faces. Cool, can you now see my screen?
Yeah, it's visible.
Perfect. Excellent. Okay, so most of you know Upright from 2 words, net and impact. And you're right, we are a company founded about 4 years ago with a very clear mission to create concrete incentives for companies to optimize their net impact. And how we do that is that we are building a large proprietary model to measure the net impact of companies and investments. So what does EU data have to do with it? And why are we now having a program that is also tackling the EU regulation? So from the very early on, actually right after founding the company, we started our first discussions with some people from the EU and some other people who are actively following the global impact scene and impact data market and happenings. And we had a discussion with the EU, and we knew that there was going to be some kind of step up by the EU when it comes to regulating how impact of businesses and investments are measured and reported. And we heard a lot about the EU taxonomy, and we had already some ideas that maybe we should probably try to do something here because we have some interesting synergies that I will shortly comment on. But one thing was for sure that this was an area that was somehow going to impact people who are using our data and basically our clients and all the people whose lives we're trying to make easier with net impact. And we started to have discussions with many of you in this session today and some other companies, investors as well, about the concrete struggles that you were facing when it came to the EU regulation. And these discussions have now increased a lot in the past 6 to 12 months, which is the reason also why we are sitting here today and having this program. So the first question is the straightforward: where exactly does this data come from? I was just recently speaking at a same seminar with a EU representative who's been working on the regulation, and it was quite funny to hear how they talked about very detailed about all the things where the regulation comes from, what is the like aim behind it, and then the final question was, okay, and then the final question is where to actually get the data. So so that's then the final little thing to be addressed. And this little thing has now been left for you as companies and investors to address. And we're doing our best to help you guys there. A second question that many of you were struggling with and still are struggling with is that, wait a minute, the EU data, when you look at the concrete answers to the taxonomy or the SFDR PAI requirements, it tells kind of a narrow part of what you actually do. For example, for many companies, the eligibility for the first two objectives, the climate change adaptation and mitigation, might be 0%. So that's not much of a sort of story to tell your clients that, hey, we have no role in fighting climate change or adapting to it. So that's obviously not really capturing all that has to do with a company. And of course, you could argue that every single company has a part to play when it comes to fighting climate change, for example. Thirdly, many of you who are investors were also wondering where this data should then come from. So one option could be that maybe we can just outsource this problem to our portfolio companies, which might sound like a good idea for about 2 minutes because you realize you just got rid of the problem you were struggling with. But pretty soon you realize that it is never in the best interest of investors to make their portfolio companies suffer. So you might want to look a bit further to find a better solution to this problem. And funnily enough, when you then turn to the companies to whom you were maybe tempted to outsource or push the problem to, they are then running into the realization that we actually do not, believe it or not, have a magic closet in our CFO offices where this data would be there to unleash or to disclose. So we've been having some really interesting discussions, not just with the smaller companies that you often think about, that do they have the resources to measure these impact metrics, but also with larger companies. One of them is present today and also promised to share his views later. So Bart Adam, the former CFO of Securitas, Swedish large company with whom we just had a touch base on this on Friday, and realized that often people think that maybe the CFO knows where to get this data, and it's not necessarily so. This is also the nature of this impact data overall is such that it is not necessarily something that companies, even with larger resources, can easily cook up. So what to do with those problems? These are the messages we kept hearing from you and our other clients. And we went to the drawing board and tried to understand, is there something that we could do as Upright? Well, to be perfectly honest, already immediately after hearing about the EU taxonomy many years ago, we understood that there might be something interesting in one technical detail, or not actually a detail, but a pretty big design criteria of our model, which is that it is based on products and services that probably the majority of you know who have been playing with our data. This might sound like just a small technical detail, but it's actually quite a fundamental detail to this session today. To understand that the Upright model is basically looking at companies through their core business. So rather than having, for example, compliance questions, we are looking at where does the money come from to the company? What are the products and the services that the company is selling and producing and marketing? And that means that we already have an off-the-shelf modeling of more than 12,000 companies on a sort of pretty granular level, and a larger scope then for a little bit less granular level, which is based on products. What that means is that we can do a simple translation from our taxonomy, which is really quite a bit more granular than the EU taxonomy, to the EU taxonomy, and that way create automated taxonomy estimates for companies. And this, of course, also applies to unlisted companies, because there is no discrimination based on the legal status and entity of the company. Okay, another synergy that we realized and started to dig deeper into was that the net impact model that we've been building for the past 4 years has some quite substantial synergies with estimating many of the PAI indicators, because obviously we've been measuring GHG emissions, waste, and a lot of the other factors that the PAI indicators are also looking at. So to make a long story short, we realized that since this is a problem many of our company and investor clients are facing, should we actually just like roll up our sleeves and integrate the EU data to the Upright's net impact platform to help our clients basically address the EU requirements in a resource efficient way. Because one thing that we learned was that the amount of time and money that you might be putting into the EU requirements is basically endless if you want to learn everything and stay up to date with what's happening, and if you start to build the data from scratch. So we started to do that first as a pilot. We pretty soon realized that actually this data looks pretty good. This is actually way better than many of our clients were saying that they were getting elsewhere. So we decided to go ahead with it. And concretely start with a program, which brings us back to today. So we decided to put together this program where we are right now, kicking it off. It's about investors and companies coming together, discussing the regulation very concretely, producing the data, and meeting together in different sessions. My colleague Toni, whom many of you have met, will introduce the sessions later today. But right now we are going deeper into the kickoff seminar where we are right now. So what do we have on the plate today? Soon after a couple of practical announcements, I will do my best to give you an idea of how we as Upright see the role of the EU regulatory data in the context of all the other impact endeavors and efforts that you might be going through. After that, we have a bunch of amazing guest speakers. I don't know, Tuukka, our producer, if you can also share some of their faces. But we have Pekka Samuelsson, who's an investment director at Aktia. We've been working together with Pekka for quite some years already. Aktia is one of the more pioneering net impact users. Pekka has concretely used the net impact approach to measure the holistic value creation of a fund that he was building and brought to market. And Pekka will give us a very concrete investment director perspective of what works and what doesn't, and how he felt about using net impact. After that, my colleague Eero Tuhka, who's leading model development at Upright, will give you the beef of what we are now talking about here, which is how exactly are we estimating the PAI indicators and the EU taxonomy using the Upright model. And Eero will also summarize a little bit about concretely what is now happening, what is being required, and from whom and when, just to make sure we are all on the same page before going into the details of the data. After Eero is done with his show, I have a pleasure of welcoming James McKeown, who's the head of data at Nasdaq. Nasdaq is actually a fresh global distribution partner of Upright's. And James will lend his thoughts on the future role that impact data will have in the global investing scene, both the so-called normal impact data and then the EU regulations as well. After James, we have Bart Adam, who I already shortly introduced, who's now the former CFO and now the advisor, the CEO at Securitas. And with Bart, we've been having some really interesting discussions about what kind of a role should holistic value creation measuring have in financial reporting. And Bart has very kindly promised to lend us his ideas towards the end of this session today. And finally, then our friend Toni, Upright COO, will give you concrete next steps for what will happen to all of you participants, what are the next sessions, how will your data concretely come about, and give you also some dates for that. Perfect. Excellent. So at this point of the pandemic, I bet you all are pros in all kinds of virtual interactions. So I trust that I don't need to train you anymore for that. But please, this is a session about obviously, since we have a lot of speakers, but we also welcome every moment we get. You in the audience to share your concrete experiences about why you decided to join this program, what are some of the things you've already done to build the EU data that you need, any questions that you might have. So please feel free to use the chat, and Toni Laitila will be moderating the chat and raising your comments. And also you can raise your hand there if you want. We have also another form of interaction that we'd like to introduce, which is what we call the pain point sheet. So this is basically a file that Tony is now sharing in the chat, the link to. But this is how it looks like. So it's basically a sheet where we invite you to write all of the problems that are pressing in your mind right now when it comes to the EU regulation and or integrating it to net impact and all of the other frameworks as well. So feel free to put your questions there, not just questions that you would like to discuss today, because obviously this is just a 2-hour session. We're not going to cover everything regarding the EU regulations today, but rather this is also then a guiding force for us in the coming weeks and months to see what kinds of topics you concretely are interested in. You can also upvote someone else's question if you see the exact same question already there using the upvote boxes there. Cool. And then, of course, this is not a secret club. So if you feel like sharing anything about the context in social media, please feel free to do so. Our aim is simply to inform investors and companies about smart and resource-efficient ways to tackle the regulation and to put the data in larger context. So feel free to do so. There are no restrictions from our part for that. Great. Now, as I said, probably almost every one of you are already pros in interacting virtually, but let's do a little practice. So if you are new to Zoom, which is the platform we are using today, you can find at the bottom bar on the right-hand side a thing called reactions. And if you go to reactions, you can find a little hand and you can raise your hand. So let's train this so that all of you feel like you have a voice during the session. So you can right now raise your hand if you know what SFDR stands for. You can see quite many hands. You can see Suvi Collin from Mandatum Life especially knows what SFDR means, and about 20 other friends. Excellent. Very good, Suvi and others. Now you can raise your hand or keep it raised if you have already at some point gotten some gray hair trying to figure out what the EU regulation means and how you should address it. Yay, we have some new hands showing up. Excellent. And then finally, a trick question. No, just kidding. If you'd like to share right now with a few sentences why your organization decided to join this program. And I don't mean to ambush anyone, so maybe I will first just ask would perhaps from EQT, Pontus or Therese, do we have you on the line? Would you like to say a couple of sentences about why you decided to join this program and what's most pressing for you right now?
Absolutely. So I hope everyone can hear us. We are actually sitting from a conference room, so we're having a bit of a difficulty raising our hand, but we will practice on that for the next session. But we're super happy to join this program. We have been watching this regulation unfold for a long time as well, and we very much welcome the regulation. As investors and owners, we feel very strongly that we need this consistent and comparable data between companies if we are to internalize and price today's externalities in the financial markets. And we have a long history of engaging with our portfolio companies when it comes to sustainability KPIs. So we will be looking at the principal adverse impacts as part of this regulation. But knowing our experience in the past, it is difficult to get access to data. So we're very interested in understanding what the upright model can provide us in terms of outside-in data, based on just what you also know about the companies from the outside, and also use then this data as an engagement tool to make the data come alive for portfolio companies and incentivize them to start working with it and improving the ESG results.
Perfect. Thanks, Therese. That's really exciting to hear how you approach the problems, and really happy to have you guys on board. Would anyone else like to just briefly share there? I don't know, Tony, if you can see better who has their hand raised.
We have a couple of people have their hand raised, but I'm not sure whether that was from the previous question.
Okay.
Please raise hands again. Really happy, even if it's a short comment, happy to hear it. I think we have one hand from is it PS? Is it Pekka there?
Pekka.
Yeah, that's me. That's me.
Okay.
But I'm waiting for my time to speak about
Okay. You were just
Yeah,
raising your
so,
hand. That's actually a great bridge for that as well. So actually, now that you, Pekka, you mentioned that you're waiting for your time to speak. Let's actually have it right now. Now that let me just skip to your section right now. So
Yeah,
as
sorry
I said before, we're really happy to have Pekka Samuelsson from Actia joining and sharing a concrete experience about how to use the net impact data as an investment director. We wanted to, it's also always a bit artificial if it comes from us, and obviously we are very biased when it comes to net impact. We wouldn't be building this model if we wouldn't so strongly believe in it. So we thought it might be a bit more refreshing maybe to hear it from someone who's been pragmatically using the data for quite some time. So Pekka, thank you so much for joining us, and the stage is yours. Let me also show your page.
Okay, so I'm Pekka Samuelsson. I'm the portfolio manager of Actia Impact Fund. That is an open fund that is trying to create some impact also in a liquid way. So the open part in the fund means that you can get in and out of the fund every 3 months. So that's my day job, and I've promised to talk about this very long heading here. Probably the finest heading I've ever talked about. What do I understand that it means that I'm talking about using net impact, and it's an investment director's perspective. So I understand it in a way that investment director's perspective is such that how do you make better investment decisions using net impact as a tool? And then if you put it very bluntly, in my fund, I have two investment targets. I need to find positive impact from the targets so that they create positive impact, but also I need to create investment returns for my clients. So basically how I understand the heading is that I'm here to tell you how to make money on net impact, to put it bluntly. Okay, and I have 2 points. The first one is that net is better than gross. Everybody who's under the Finnish tax regime knows that net can be very different from gross. And also the same goes for impact. So all the companies try to put the best possible face on themselves. They try to tell positive things about themselves while not telling about the negative things as much as the positive things. And obviously they should do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But as an investment director, you want to know a little bit behind that. And you want to know whether the net impact of a company is positive or not. And I think this opens up best if you use examples. The first, and these are very, how would I say, extreme and obvious examples, but I think they kind of bring the message home in the easiest possible way. The first example is British American Tobacco is a proud member of Dow Jones Sustainability World Index. Might be surprising to you, but they have a very strong ESG program. They treat their employees well. They treat their farmers well. They use very good ingredients. They treat minorities well in the workplace and so on. So they do a very strong, and obviously they have huge resources to put into their ESG reporting. So they are very good at that too. However, net impact reveals to you that obviously the net impact of a company whose product kills people is very negative. So a very extreme, very obvious point, but that's one. In real life, obviously these are more shades of gray, these things, or in other things, but this is a very good example. Another example is a Finnish state-owned gambling monopoly, Veikkaus, who also like to talk about their positive impact to the society, which comes from the fact that they generate revenue that can then be used in a special way. I don't go into the details, but that's kind of the revenues do create positive social impact. But however, again, the net impact of the company, as revealed by for example, Upright's model, is very negative because their business, for example, includes having a mini casino in every grocery store in Finland. So it's quite obvious that the net impact is not positive. And when I talk about net impact, Annu is showing here my fund's net impact profile. So maybe a few words about how that goes for the people who are not that familiar with that. But you can see from here that, for example, the fund's investments have a very positive impact on society, and they have some negative influences on society also, but they are dwarfed by the positive ones. And also they have a positive influence on the environment, but they also do have some negative impacts also. So the total of all these is then calculated to be the net impact of the fund. Did I get it right, Annu?
Yes.
And you can see here a little bit of advertising here. The net impact ratio of the fund is very positive. So we have investment targets that are doing a positive net impact on society. So maybe this opens up this a little bit, what I'm talking about. Okay, and then we get to the second point, and this is the more important point. Understanding the externalities, which is a little bit similar thing towards net impact. Understanding the net, you could also say understanding the net impact of your investment targets gives you a hint of the long-term future of the business. And as we all know who have been making investment decisions, it's very hard to estimate the future of a company over the long term, let's say 3+ years. I can guarantee you that none of the estimates by the analysts are going to be, right over such a long term. They are going to be hugely wrong, and that's nothing wrong about that. That's the way it should be. But if you can get a glimpse of the future after that, then even little glimpses are very valuable. And why is that? I argue that if you have positive externalities, if you have positive net impact, you're going to see in the future more favorable public sector decisions affecting your business. For example, if you are doing renewable energy, it's very likely that also in the future, the decisions that have to do with your business are going to be more positive for you. And not only public sector, actually, it's going to be the third sector also, the customers and so on, who all have a favorable viewpoint on your business if you do a positive impact on society. And the second point is the more important one. You will have a recruiting advantage, especially the younger generation. It's very important for them that they do a job with a purpose. And the purpose cannot only be making money. All companies should make money. I'm very much thinking that way still. I'm not, I believe that that's the core purpose of companies, is to make money for the shareholders, no doubt about that. But I argue that they will make more money if they have also a second purpose. They have a mission, something else. For example, a renewable energy company can have a purpose that we will fight climate change as we make money in the same time. And when you have the recruiting advantage, you will find easier to recruit people. You will find better people. You will find people who commit better to your business, and they get better results. And this obviously is a huge advantage in any business. And then if you go, and then this works in the other way also, obviously. If you are, for example, the coal energy producer, you face you're likely to face hurdles done by public sector, the general public, and so on, and you will have some recruiting problems, and you will have a ban on your business in 2029, for example, in Finland. Another example about these might be, for example, payday loans, which came into Finland, say, 10 years ago. And in the beginning, they made a lot of money by doing that. And it looked very lucrative to get into that. But a person who had the net impact by themselves, if he had a hypothetical upright project model 10 years ago, would have seen that they have a very negative effect on society. And they might have suspected that maybe this will not last forever. It didn't last forever. After, say, 5 years, restrictions started coming in, and they have now become so strict that a lot of the companies have actually went bankrupt. Okay, and then the last point is that over the long term, you get this glimpse. And in the past, the long term has really been a long term. For example, smoking. The mankind smoked for about 7,000 years before we started realizing that that's not good for you. Coca-Cola could sell their product for almost 100 years, the sugar product, almost 100 years without getting into trouble about the sugar intake that you do when you drink it. They did, however, have to change the recipe after 16 years so that it did not include cocaine anymore. But anyway, it has become shorter, the long term, in the way that, for example, Coca-Cola, when they introduced the artificial sweeteners, it took much less time for people to react about the negative side effects that these products had. And you can also, the payday loans example goes here. The lead time in the long term was only 5 years or less after it started to become a problem for the companies. And for example, the very recent example is the electric scooters, where the discussion has already, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 years or 3 maybe, has already led to some restrictions for the business that they are doing, because they cause a lot of accidents, and there's leaving the scooters anywhere is not that nice looking, and people walk less and so on. There are positive sides obviously also, but the point is that this has started to become a very big discussion already now. And where does this all end? Is that I believe that using net impact, understanding the net impact of your investment targets, brings you better long-term financial returns. And my personal thinking, and this is not scientific because it's very recent, is that this will probably happen through fewer disasters in your portfolio. By understanding the net impact of your businesses, you understand that there might be something wrong in some of them, that somebody will then react to, be it then public sector, customers, or somebody else who does that. And also a second good point is that you get into fewer embarrassments. We all know that impact investing is growing really fast, but I think impact washing, greenwashing is growing even faster. And there's plenty of opportunity for all of us to invest in businesses that we believe to be impact businesses, but are really not. So that's my understanding on how to use this net impact thinking to your advantage. I'm happy to answer some questions, but unfortunately, and that's why I was waving my hand digitally, I need to leave in about 5 minutes. So that's why I was so eager to make my presentation. That's why I'm so eager to answer your questions right now.
Thanks, Pekka, so much for sharing your very concrete experience of of using the data. And as said, that's why I also hoped for some of you, if you got confused about swapping the agenda items, I wanted to make sure that Pekka has enough time to talk through his part. If there are any questions right now for Pekka, just let us know in the chat. I don't know, Toni, if you have anything to highlight there.
So yeah. No questions from the chat yet, but happy to hear direct comments, because I know that we've been discussing the exact same topic of using net impact to make money with some of our participants, like Maria from Norslab, for instance, if you want to share your view on this topic as well. But no questions in the chat at this moment yet.
Okay, maybe we let Maria a moment to think about if she wants to comment or not. But please feel free to don't be shy with the chat or then the question sheet if you'd rather write some of your comments down and have us address them throughout the program in the next 4 months. Okay, so now where are we? I shared you briefly why on earth a company concentrating at net impact is now also producing the EU data. Then we heard from Pekka about a concrete experience of using the net impact approach with his fund. I kind of feel that we owe you also since we are now also producing the EU data, we believe that we owe you kind of like our view of how to set the EU data in context. And this is something that we've been quite a bit now discussing also internally at Upright and with many of you as our clients and as users of the data. So basically, when it comes to integrating the EU data in a broader context, what does it concretely mean? So what are the questions that we have been discussing with many of you program participants before this session? One of them is, okay, so we have all of these impact and ESG efforts, and now we have these new EU regulatory requirements. What will be the role between the two? And I know some of you are from one extreme or the other. One might see that, okay, this is just a way to tick the box. We just need to tick the box for the EU regulation and continue on our path with, for example, Pekka just now explained his views as investment director with net impact, or some other approach that you might be using. And the other extreme might be that, hey, this EU thing is huge. This is going to cost us so much money and so much time. So this must have some kind of a role of how we will be holistically reporting on our impact. And then most of you are somewhere in between of these two extremes. So what does that mean? A second question is, what exactly does the EU data tell and what does it leave out? For quite a long time, there's been a lot of webinars about the EU regulations and so on. I've also been taking a part in a few of them myself. And I think there's a lot of discussion about what are the guesses about what will change and when and what is the aim behind it. But to concretely look at the data for one company, and we're going to do that in just 2 minutes, gives you a lot of insight of what the EU data actually tells and what does it not tell. And this is a key thing to understand when thinking about what kind of a role this data should have. So what questions does it address and answer, and which does it not answer? And finally, when communicating about your impact, really, I don't think anyone wants to tell their story that, hey, our eligibility for climate change adaptation objective is 0%. Go figure, we have no impact. That's hardly 2021 impact reporting or communicating anyway. We all know that all companies have a number of both negative and positive impacts. So that's simply not the story you want to tell, nor is it the story that tells the truth. So it should be something else. So what then to do? Because we kind of bear the responsibility of also being very honest about the EU data now that we are producing it as well. We try to put the data in context for you. So the data has been criticized quite a bit for telling a narrow story. And there is a reason for it if we look at facts. So let's look at a concrete company and the so-called answer to that company when it comes to the EU data. So this is now, I took this from the Upright Net Impact platform where we now also have the EU data in it. So this is now the data points for Nestlé, an example company that hopefully everyone knows, has an idea of what they do. And these are now the 16 PAI indicators for Nestlé and their climate change adaptation and mitigation eligibility percentages. So this is kind of like the answer as it is today for Nestlé when it comes to EU data. So what can we say based on this view that we are now looking at? Well, if I was now an investor and I would have to make some decisions based on this, obviously I would want to put this in some kind of context. This data alone does not really help me to figure out if this is a good or bad investment target. And of course, the 0% for climate change adaptation and mitigation tells me that not that much really about this company. So what can be done? What we've been doing at Upright is we try to understand if we map this data against a net impact profile. So we try to put this data in a context of a more holistic approach to impact that looks at all of the different impact dimensions and both the negative and the positive side. So what can we see here? Well, obviously, it probably comes as no big surprise that the principles adverse impacts, as their name suggests, really concentrate on the negative side. And as you can also see on this picture. What does it mean? It means that just purely based on these data points, it's really hard to say what these companies actually get done. So what are these resources being used for? If I now had the same PAI indicators for, let's say, two companies, one of them was an energy company and the another was, say, an IT consulting company, I would be tempted to, or I'm guessing right now, and actually not just guessing, but knowing that the PAI indicators would be much heavier when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions and so on for the energy company than they would be for the IT consulting company. So would that mean that I should invest only in IT consulting and leave energy sector completely alone? That doesn't sound like it makes a whole lot of sense investing wise either, or whichever stakeholder identity I'm then trying on. So I would somehow need to understand what the resource is being used for. So what is happening on the plus side, which of course is then something that a more holistic approach here linked to the net impact profile is trying to suggest and tell. Also, if we look at what are then the insights that are being uncovered by the net impact profile that are left unseen by the regulatory data, there's quite a bit that the regulatory data just doesn't look at. In this very concrete example of Nestlé, even though I just mentioned that the PAI indicators are heavy on the negative side, they are not also either capturing even everything in the negative side. For example, the adverse impacts on health that comes from the sugary sweets and drinks that Nestlé is producing and marketing quite a bit are completely ignored by the PAIs because that's not something that the PAIs are looking at. And to be fair for Nestlé, also the positive health impacts and nutritional impacts of some of their more healthier products are also left unseen by the PAI indicators. So it seems like in order for the EU data to make some sense, they would need to be set in the context of some broader framework of impact to really understand how that company is impacting the world around them. Okay, so what can we do concretely to set these data points in context? And what does this apply to? Is this only about the regulatory data? Unfortunately, the same applies to many other lenses that are being used today when it comes to impact. So just looking at a pretty narrow part of the impact of a company or investment, which makes it hard, makes life sometimes pretty hard for anyone trying to make sense of the scene, either as a client or investor or a company trying to make your own impact story understandable, fact-based and coherent. So just as an example, a brief example of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are a great example of priorities being listed, but that have been widely misused also as kind of like semi-pseudo metrics for impact as well, in the format of, hopefully I'm not now hurting anyone's feelings, but what I call contribution stickers. So this widely adopted practice of smart executive boards and management directors going to a boardroom and then thinking about which SDGs do we most contribute to, and then coming up with the most creative stories of how we actually contribute to almost all of them, and then collecting these stickers in our annual report. I'm not going to go into all of the problems that have to do with using the SDGs this way as these contribution stickers, but there are ways that can be done. So we can put the SDG lenses also in perspective of a broader, more MISI, so mutually exclusive, collectively resourceful way of looking at impact, which gives you an idea of what is big and what is not. What we have concretely done with the SDGs, and this will be actually launched to our platform in a couple of weeks, is showing the SDGs in a way where we measure both the negative and the positive contributions and linking them to the wider perspective of net impact. So this is an example of how more narrow lenses like the EU data or the SDGs can be put in context and to be able to show what is big and what is not. So not just having the stickers here, but to also give the viewer an idea of the scale of the impacts as well. And so that things would not be too easy for investors and companies, at the same time, of course, the EU regulation is not the only so-called new requirement. As all of you know, companies and investors are really facing increasingly high threshold for what good looks like when it comes to impact measuring. I'm not going to embark on a whole rant about all of the different requirements, because we've been discussing many of these with almost all of you already. But as you know, anecdotes don't fly anymore. You need to have quantitative metrics, and they need to be clear and impartial enough. You need to look at various frameworks, like we just looked at the SDGs or the EU data. You need to be able to link financial risk and opportunities. So impact cannot be a separate boat anymore, where you have the impact story and then the financial story. But these two need to go together because they are fundamentally and materially linked to one another. You need to be able to compare, not just within industries, but also across industries. And finally, you can't just look at one data point in time, but you need to be able to track your progress and show how your fund or your company or your portfolio has been developing over time. So the question is then, how to stay sane in all of this as a company or investor? So what to do with all of these requirements? How we try to help us Upright, and this is also my sort of pursuit to explain to you what we are doing right now, is to try to bring all of these lenses under one roof and integrate them to a holistic view of what is big and what is not, of looking at all the different ways a company can impact the world around them, and tying them all together to show the scale of things as well. What does it mean under one roof? Well, very concretely for us, it means bringing them under one model. So concretely, the Upright model now spits out not just the net impact, but also the SDG data and the EU taxonomy and SFDR PAI data, and bringing them also under one platform that Eero is going to show in just a few minutes, more concretely how this looks like in the net impact platform as well. This is our sort of aim and our ambition level at trying to make it easier and more sense-making. And you could ask why. And the simple question is that we think we cannot afford to lose a lot of the sort of clarity that is needed in the global impact data scene to get people to talk about the same things, to show different metrics on the same page, to see what they tell and what they leave out, to understand coherent stories about investments and companies that make sense and that are comparable with one another. I'm going to leave you today, before I unleash the power of Eero, to go into more concreteness of the data and to show you it concretely in the platform, that luckily the EU does not lead the development here. So we don't have to worry too much about whether the requirements are exactly the ones that we think make the most sense, because obviously it's the best-in-class investors and companies and their stakeholders, so many of you in this session today, who actually determine what good looks like. So I think the rest is really pretty much just rolling up our sleeves and starting to show this data in a good way. Hopefully you are all ready for the challenge. What about you, Eero? Are you ready for the challenge to then tackle some of the most difficult questions? So how do we concretely then estimate the PAI data and the EU taxonomy data using the Upright model, and also bringing everybody on the same page of what is now happening? So what is required, from whom, and when?
Yes, thanks, Annu. Really happy to take on the challenge, so to say. I think there's a fair bit of difficult bits in there. Let me just quickly make sure I have things covered, and I guess you can hear me as well. Let me know if not.
Yes.
I think interesting field. Really good context from Annu. Now getting a bit more into the weeds, so to say, of the regulation. First of all, we have spent a lot of time going through what is the current state of the regulation, trying to condense that into literally 2 pages. And we're happy to kind of share our crystallized information of what we think is coming up and what is really now critical and what does that mean in practice, and then kind of show a bit more thoroughly on the platform side what this kind of output looks like in terms of both disclosure data as well as the estimation side that Anna was also talking about. I have a couple of kind of exciting case examples to show and kind of highlight some of those points. First, kind of going off into what is required. I'm splitting this up now into kind of two tracks. One is the SFDR or principal adverse impact side. How does that relate to companies and investment products? And then the EU taxonomy side. So kind of two complementary regulations where I at least spent myself some time trying to understand how they interconnect. On the principal adverse impact side, the 16 separate metrics that you saw for Nestle coming up. Some of those fairly potentially easy to populate even inside out or outside in. Some of those being then really challenging. The regulation is such that it gives us a indication of what we're supposed to report, not so how we're supposed to get that data in. So that's what we're trying to tackle. We know that things are in flux. It was only recently that the timetables were pushed forward, I think by half a year roughly, with an additional indication that the regulation will be amended as well. So kind of a moving target. The disclosure requirements, interestingly, also for investment products cover companies outside of the EU. Which means that companies that have never heard of principal adverse impacts will need to be reported on. And kind of finally pointing out why we have this kind of in brackets check mark for companies as well here is that even though currently it's only investment products, kind of funds and so on, that are expected to report on principal adverse impacts, we also expect that companies might get included in that bit sooner or later. And even on the short term, would be expected that investors will start to ask companies to report some of the numbers that they don't have available by themselves. In addition to the principal adverse impacts, we obviously have the taxonomy side as well, which at the moment covers two fractions. The environmental ones, we know 4 more are coming. Timetables are going to be interesting. This is relevant both for companies and investment products. On the investment product side, obviously, things are a bit more nuanced in the sense that you can kind of get away from the reporting requirement if you were to classify none of your funds as being sustainable on the environment side. But us, at least being on this call, I expect mostly to be kind of talking about Article 8 and 9 funds when it comes to SFDR. For company reporting, we have a delegated act that has proposed a format and amended or basically postponed the schedule of the disclosure. But on the investment product side, still some unclarities about how the exact format should look like. Additionally, the timing, as I'll kind of briefly show next, is going to be interesting. The exact scope of companies that will need to report on the taxonomy alignment is probably also going to change going forward. We currently now talk about only kind of large companies in air quotes, but with the expectation that smaller companies will need to report at some point, and even at this point are kind of allowed to report as they see fit. Right. So that's basically the set of numbers that need to come out. Then how about the schedule? I kind of ended up putting this down into three tracks or 3 kinds of entities to think about. Number 1 is big companies, so companies under NFRD. These are large companies, I think at least 500 FTE with some revenue and balance sheet thresholds as well. This is a small subset of companies globally, but then obviously kind of interesting companies for investors. As per the latest Article 8 taxonomy delegated act, which as far as I know is not yet fully ratified, but shortly potentially being enforced. will need to start reporting eligibility from the beginning of next year for those 2 environmental goals. And then when it comes to alignment here, the latest delegated act does take into account kind of the difference between companies and then financial institutions investing in said companies, such that the alignment side would be required from companies starting from 2023. And that gives them a year for financial institutions to start collecting that data from their investee companies, such that they can kind of group that together for their portfolios in 2024. PAI indicators, as noted, not yet kind of confirmed for companies even under NFRD, but potentially coming into play when this upcoming regulation will come into discussion and so on. Then we talk about, this is big companies now, so I also like to talk about small companies. So CSRD companies, where the timelines currently look like being pushed out a bunch, taxonomy eligibility potentially coming up first in 2024. Let's see, that's kind of highly uncertain at this point, given kind of the flux and state of change that we have for the regulation. And then obviously alignment and PAI indicators potentially expected in the future as well. Does that mean that small companies can say that we don't really really care about these numbers? Not really, since we expect that investors will also start looking at these data points at some point, and kind of not disclosing is not necessarily going to be the best look. Finally, if we look at investment products, this is now, if you look at the schedules in close enough detail, you kind of notice that even at the moment, the taxonomy alignment requirement for funds would start from the beginning of next year, given how the schedules for alignment were pushed back on the company regulation side or reporting side. Might be expected that this number or this schedule also moves around. However, what currently looks like them being kind of the number one thing coming up in the scopes is the SFDR regulation for investment products, starting from July 2022. As far as we know, kind of this has been pushed back a couple of times now, and the latest pushback was by only 6 months. So kind of as you might expect, this is probably the first big thing to kind of respond to. So basically what we try to kind of gather from here is now kind of what is uncertain, what is less so, what looks to be kind of the first things that will come out of the door that investors and companies will need to react to. That being taxonomy eligibility, and that being then the PAI indicators for investors, and as mentioned, those being relevant for companies as well. Now, kind of echoing Annu's point on, can we just kind of do the bare minimum here and just tick the box around these? Our strong belief is not necessarily. As we go kind of into the nuts and bolts of it and into some case example companies, I think we can kind of clearly see that just kind of ticking the box and reporting on things like the eligibility or PAI indicators might not give you the full context of the company, and kind of the perception that you want to make might not be kind of reflected in just kind of the tick the box regulatory data. Now hopping on, I think there's a bunch of stuff going on in the chat, but I'll kind of briefly go through the case example companies as well, and then go into questions if that's good. So we've talked about kind of what needs to get done. Let's talk about what would that kind of roughly look like. So hopping onto our platform side, I have a couple of companies that you can maybe see here in the tab bar, and I'm going to talk you through. I think they showcase a bunch of different interesting things. We're going to kind of continue with Nestle because we already kind of covered them briefly, and in the kind of notion of what kind of magic closets do you have in the CFO office, I think Nestle kind of goes into having a direct access to Narnia in their CFO's office in terms of their own disclosure and data they're able to provide. So kind of simple enough to look at. So Nestle net impact profile we all saw, but on the taxonomy principal impact side, then how does this look like? We know that the technically eligibility for Nestle on the climate action side seems to be 0. That is because the NACE code list that has been provided on the climate change side is limited. It covers complete product categories somewhere, and then it basically completely excludes food and beverages. Therefore, if you're a Nestle, you need to report this as a 0. You might be surprised that is the case. That might not be indicative of what you want to communicate as Nestle, and even as an investor, I'm not sure if this kind of covers the full picture. How about on the PAI indicator side then as well? Here's a kind of how the thing looks like. This is basically just a platform view of what you saw on slides. A couple of things I just want to highlight here, kind of the Narnia aspect of Nestle being one of the few companies that actually do report all of their GHG emissions, including scope 3, which being the most difficult one. Here, kind of the takeaways being, if you just look at internal or even kind of slightly auxiliary emissions, we're talking about, say, individual millions of tons of CO emissions. But if you look at the total carbon footprint of Nestle, that's kind of heavily dominated by the scope 3 emission side. This is kind of a recurring theme across companies. If we think about kind of where does Upright come from and how we think about this, I think it's kind of completely understandable in a sense that these companies tend to have tremendous amounts of impact just outside of their direct influence. And counting that in is kind of critical to understand the total impact of the company, and kind of this kind of validates the picture in a sense. So we're kind of glad to see this kind of a phenomenon come about. That also kind of gives us the difficulty in a sense that if you really wanted to understand GHG intensity for companies and really make it comparable and understand it, you do need to fill in scope 3, which is going to be basically by far the most difficult scope to fill in. Will include a bunch of estimates, even if you are a company doing this on yourself, because you basically need to go into kind of stakeholder companies as well, either question them or estimate things and so on. Some other things in here that I do want to highlight. If we look at the definition of hazardous waste or emissions to water for Nestle, those numbers are going to be fairly low by definition. If we look at carbon disclosure, we talk about kind of whole value chain of things happening. When we talk about water emissions and hazardous waste, these are really only just internal. So if I were looking as an investor at Nestle, I would expect this number to be different given the amount of say plastic waste that they generate down the line when plastic bottles are consumed and so on. Some numbers in here also kind of fairly interesting but difficult to cover. I think on just gender pay gap, I've heard a lot of different people kind of groan about this and say like it's going to be difficult unless the companies themselves do it. Outside in, you would probably need to resort to proxies. Then if we look at categories of like easy to fill out impacts, where I'm not necessarily sure how much they actually tell about the company, board diversity is one of the numbers that is going to be fairly easy to fill in. We've actually made pretty good success on that, just basically scraping publicly available information to fill that in. But then even in going into kind of the final category of fairly easy to fill in, especially if you have the data that we have, and also potentially informative. So activity in the fossil fuel sector, here kind of our estimation is based on us looking at what exact products and services the companies involved in and filling that out that way. So in this case, we basically looked at everything that Nestle does and compared that against our taxonomy of known products and services in the fossil fuel sector, and found that basically none of those match. UNGC violations, these kinds of things, again, something that we can use publicly available sources to fill out. And then finally, one of my, I would say, least favorite indicators, controversial weapons. This I would call very easy to fill in, but basically non-informative in the sense that there's basically 20 companies with publicly tradable securities that actually fit this bill. Nuclear weapons are excluded, so Lockheed Martin, these kinds of companies don't actually flag here. So basically any reasonable investment universe is going to flag this as basically none. So kind of summa summarum, what do we kind of gather from this? There's a lot of really interesting things here, really of the say GHG intensity side, especially if you take the whole emission life cycle into account. Some things in here that are kind of less interesting, potentially easy to fill out, and then finally some things that are potentially informative, but in some cases potentially misleading, where you do really need to think about, say, net impact or other kinds of models where we do take the full value chain into account, even on those ones.
Eero, sorry to interrupt you. I'm just making sure that we get to gather all the points also throughout the rest of the demo. So just I'm going to summarize. We're going to give the voice to many of our audiences already, but just to summarize a couple of questions from the chat already now. So Linda from Capman is asking for some examples also from the smaller unlisted space, just something that you can maybe take into account while the rest of the demo. Lillian is asking about the different, how do we cope with the different definitions of scope 3 that we know companies have various versions of. And then there are some questions of asking to show some taxonomy, eligibility, and alignment data where it doesn't just show 0 as it does for Nestle. This was probably, maybe it was coming in your demo. Just wanted to make sure you are covering these in the next 5 minutes or so.
Yes, I will. I'll cover the second one, I think, first, and then my next demo company, I guess, will actually cover the other two. So how do we deal with companies with different scope 3 definitions? I think that's a terrific question. That's something that we really been frustrated ourselves as well, given that kind of on the surface, it seems like there's a lot of reporting and disclosure for companies where they say scope 3 and then a number and then a footnote. And more often than not, that footnote exists, and that footnote is going to say we've only looked at categories of scope 3 emissions that are A, easy for us to produce, and B, produce kind of results that we kind of find convenient for ourselves. So the universe of companies that report scope 1 emissions is fairly kind of significant at this point, which I'm glad about. Scope 2, that kind of narrows down. And then when you look at scope 3, you get a substantial amount of companies. But finally, if you just filter down into companies that do that on an extensive scale, such as basically everything where we do report direct company disclosures for scope 3, that is unfortunately still a fairly small number of companies. I'll go a bit later into detail about how do we kind of infer things. I think that's coming up with Xilinx. But basically, the key there is the more data we have on the disclosure side, obviously that makes our predictions also more accurate. But even with kind of very limited scope 3 emission data, we've found that we're able to make at least some level of estimates. And when we actually then hop onto Xilinx, which is a chip manufacturer, it's a bit of an odd company, but I'd selected it out because it's a smaller one. It's interesting in a sense that they actually outsource all of their manufacturing. It's basically a design company that then does outsource manufacturing of their chips. Based in the US, I think. I'm not sure if these guys are publicly traded or not, but in my head go into kind of companies that do a lot less disclosure, at least. So kind of in that sense, comparable to, say, private smaller companies where you would basically just need to go in outside it. So what does Xilinx look like? These guys make systems on a chip, all kinds of different microcontrollers, silicon-based products. What does the eligibility look like for these guys? It's not 0, it's almost 70%. Here we kind of run into kind of the other side of the issue. So with Nestle, remembered basically none of their products and services fall under the taxonomy. So you need to report out 0 even for eligibility. Then if we look at Xilinx, basically all chips, electronics fit in terms of eligibility. So you could basically say that we'll screen all the different chips that these guys make. And when we look at substantial contribution criteria, when we look into alignment, we then actually analyze if those things are going to be used in renewable energy technologies. And the expectation is that this number, 68, 69%, is going to come down substantially. I'm not I can't say that I'm intimately aware of what Xilinx does, but I would not expect 70% of their revenue to come out of renewable energy technologies. So here, kind of on the eligibility side, you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot and say like, okay, our alignment is, or eligibility is 0, give the wrong impression that way. Or in this case, you might shoot yourself in the foot a bit later, where you first say that my eligibility is 70%, amp up expectations really high, and then disappoint people when you say like actual alignment, when you look at what actually of my manufacturing fits renewable energy technology is going to be a lot lower. So good to keep that in mind. If we look at the principal adverse impact side, here we now go into estimates. So as you see here, kind of, I think none of these numbers were reported in the data that we've gathered so far. We're obviously kind of gathering more and more, and as more data becomes available, we factor that in and kind of estimate or impute only the ones that we don't have data on. But in case of Xilinx, at the moment, this is one of those companies where basically need to estimate all their GHG intensity. Kind of positively, what you can see here is kind of the same phenomenon as with Nestle. Most of the emissions out of Xilinx come from their scope 3 emissions. Estimating that in is then critical to actually come up with a reasonable number here. If I were to leave out this, I would reduce the kind of implied GHG intensity kind of terrifically. Right. Finally, what I wanted to highlight on the Xilinx side before I go into our last company is the emission side. So same with Nestle, you would kind of expect this number to be something, but given that these guys don't manufacture the hardware themselves, they contract that out to an outsourced party. The water emissions out of Xilinx basically limit to their office buildings, and the hazardous waste number is also going to be basically 0 because all of that waste will be generated in the manufacturing process or downstream when chips are being used in say phones and so on. Finally, negatively affecting biodiversity sensitive areas, we need to flag that as basically none, given that, again, manufacturing happens somewhere else. These guys are basically a R&D office, which you might not expect to report out if you were investing in a chip company.
I think all of this highlights the need to put this data in a broader context, as you can see that the PAI indicators, and as they are defined today, only tell a narrow story. I guess that's what Eero's demo is also trying to highlight at this point. Can you, Eero, very quickly still show us the last company before moving on to more questions? I think Tony has a bunch of questions he would like to highlight from the audience.
Yes, really quickly showing that out. I think most of the points I were able to make. So finally taking out Telia, the reason I wanted to highlight these guys is typically telco companies tend to have fairly high net impact scores in our model, given the positive impact in terms of making internet available to people, having access to knowledge, maintaining relationships, especially now in the last 2 years or so, and kind of contrasting what our net impact profile would look like next to the regulatory data of say Telia. So on the taxonomy side, some of their broadcasting things end up on the climate change adaptation side. 12%, though I guess this is so far the most realistic number we've seen so far. But kind of looking at the set of activities that are flagged under eligibility, we again expect that number to kind of go down as we take alignment into view. On the principal adverse impact side, here, kind of quick note, they do report, this is kind of a typical scenario, do report scope 1 and 2 emissions, given that those are kind of easier to calculate. But if we want to really come up with a comparable number to say Xilinx and Nestle, we would need to come up with a scope 3 number. So we estimate that and then basically use the carbon footprint and GHG intensity for that whole scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, instead of basically adding up scope 1 and 2 and saying this is GHG intensity footnote only for scope 1 and 2. That's basically it. If I were to look at this set of PAI indicators, I don't think they're wrong. I think they are somewhat informative, but in terms of do they really give me the comprehensive picture of Telia, I'm not sure. I would really want to look at it next to something like the net impact chart of the company. that's basically all I have for you guys today. I'm really excited to kind of show stuff all on the platform side as well. So we're kind of working quickly and hard to bring this all together and make sure that we have the latest and greatest in terms of a comprehensive view, be that the net impact, UNGC numbers, regulatory data, all of that together, so you can kind of, as an investor, as a company, really see the full picture.
Perfect. Tony, we have about a couple of minutes, or let's take like a bit less than 5 minutes for questions. Just one clarification to Eero's demo before we go that. So when it says estimate here, in case that wasn't clear for everybody, when it says estimate here, that means the part where we're using the upright model to formulate the numbers when they are not being found, so companies are not reporting them themselves. I'm not sure if that was super clear to everyone from Eero's demo, but that was one of the beef that we wanted to make. But basically, there's a ton of data points that companies are not disclosing themselves, especially coming back to Linda's question about the unlisted space. This is obviously almost always the case. And when it says estimate, it does not mean it's a more poor quality data point. It means it's been produced using the upright net impact model. Just to clarify on the words on the page. But Tony, please go ahead. We have a ton of questions. Have you been able to choose a couple of ones to address? We already took a couple of ones there at the mid of the demo.
That was a great segue to the topic and this question. So one I want to highlight from Lilian from Arisaik about the Scope 3 emissions. Just, I don't know, Lilian, if you want to share yourself some of the issues around finding the Scope 3 data, but from our perspective, one of the kind of the benefits or angles we have approached the Scope 3 is that we use the kind of the exact same approach for all companies. So it's actually comparable compared to the disclosed values. So we can show both models and disclose together. And that's something we find quite interesting. But please, Lilian, if you have something to share on that, happy to give you the opportunity.
No, actually, that was actually precisely what I was wondering, because I know that the advantage of Upright is that you can have this top-down global view. So to, I guess, make sure everything adds up, which individual companies, like even in their best efforts, wouldn't be able to do, I guess. So I guess I was interested to see if there are differences in how Upright's model estimates Scope 3 versus what the company discloses.
Exactly. That's a really good highlight. And that's exactly the problem that you're seeing. And I think many of the participants of today's session have been running into. So the definitions by which companies are determining the Scope 1 and 2 and 3, especially the 3, are very varying. And that makes it difficult to even compare the Scope 3 emissions. So what we're doing is we're always using, if a company own estimate is available, we're always using it and showing it. However, given the different definitions, we're always also basing the top-down approach where we are calculating all of the points only one time, and as all of this rant, to show also the holistic modeling how it would show up, and then using these together with the regression model to actually form the values that should be used. But we are also at this point wanting to be super transparent and showing you both the company disclosures and the modeled versions to be able to also make it transparent some of the problems that the global impact data scene is having. Thanks for the great question. Tony, did you have another question you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, so Karen from EV Private Equity from Norway shared a question. It came privately to me, but she was asking about why to start now with the principal adverse indicators when the regulation is kicking in only in July. And I think that's something that we have discussed a lot with our participants. And Karen, if you have something to share on that, happy to give you the stage. But shortly put, what our experience with our investor clients and other participants has been is that many are interested in seeing the principal adverse indicators and the EU taxonomy eligibility and alignment indication before the regulation kicks in, so they know how they will look and maybe even start integrating these into their investment processes before the gets going. But Karen, if you have something to share or some considerations you have, happy to hear them.
Yes, I think my question was mostly based around the delay in the implementation of the RTS, but also around the uncertainties that were highlighted in the document that was issued. So we are still not entirely sure about the definitions of the PAIs. So my question was really, are we not implementing this too soon?
Yeah, that's a great question, and other participants can join in as well. But in short, how we see this, and one of the reasons why we kicked off this program as well, is to kind of understand what is the current situation with the principal adverse indicators as they look now, and as they're being updated, we can update the data as well to see how they progress, but also to have the kind of the best possible view available at the time. Anna.
Maybe one comment. I think it is not, when you think about what this concretely means for companies and investors, it's not so much about how exactly one data point is being changed. We've already know that we've been building the data, we've been faced with a lot of changes and done the updates. I think it's more about the practice of where do you get the data and having that process up and running, and then smaller changes, the actual definitions of the PAIs. I believe they will come. I almost hope they will come, because I don't think the PAIs are perfect as they are today. So we are almost hoping them to develop quite a bit, but we see great value in building up these processes of being able to address these, build these data points and address them. And one thing that I would, at least as an investor, I would like to have, or as a company, that if I know this is something that will be disclosed of me in 6 months or even 9 months, I would really like to know now and try to estimate it about myself before this information is being accessible by others. That's also one of the reasons why, pretty much purely as an urgency from you as our clients, we've been building this data already now, even though it applies to some of you only in July. But a great question about the timing, and I think for this, many of you know your own urgency best. But this is our approach and recommendation. Cool.
If I may, Anu?
Yeah, sure.
If I may, I very much support that, and I think it's critical that the investor community starts looking at the data and what's most helpful to them, and also find channels then to feed that into the Commission and into Brussels. And if that's via you or other forums that you're involved, but I think that's critical. And I also think that the beauty of the top-down approach is that it's maybe a little bit less sensitive to the exact definitions, because you're still modeling an estimate from the top down, whereas the very fine-tuning on the definitions, it's what will be needed when you're building the data bottom up from a company perspective.
Thanks, Therese. That's really good. I couldn't have said it better myself. Exactly. And that's exactly the approach that we've been doing so far. So the updates we've gotten, they haven't really changed the work from our part that much. If you change a little bit of definition, the huge model behind it is really what stays. And then we just tweak it to address what is there. And the part about feedback to the EU, I couldn't stress this enough. I see there's a lot of responsibility with us as data providers, with all of you as companies and investors, to also make sure that feedback about what kind of regulation really works is fed to the EU. We're doing our part, but we need your help as well. So that's also one good reason why we can't be early enough with questions like this. And maybe a third lens is looking at the questions this regulation is trying to address, whether it's doing a good job or not. We really don't have too much time to waste. So that's also one answer to the question. Toni, I know you have a bunch of questions, but I would really love to also give the floor now to James, because we've been really looking forward to also unleashing the magic of one of our oops, I pressed the wrong button. So let me also share my screen at this point. So I'm very happy to now announce our next speaker, who is also our fresh global distribution partner. So James McKeown, the VP and head of data from NASDAQ, who has very kindly promised to lend us his ideas on what the future of the global impact data scene really looks like. So a warm welcome, James.
Thanks, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
We're so happy to have you. So James has promised to do a little bit of an interview and answer 3 questions to us this afternoon. And I'm going to dig right into it because I know we have a packed schedule. So at first, I would like to ask this really narrow and small question of your view of how the current and the future importance of impact-related data is looking like in the global investing scene.
Yeah, sure. And I'll try to keep it reasonably short. I mean, I think the importance of impact-related data to investors is really high now, and ever increasingly so. You know, when you're assessing investments from an ethical perspective, financial institutions really have to focus or they have focused, sorry, on the downside. So companies doing wrong, but there's clearly a need to think about a difference that you're actually creating with any instrument. And for that, having great impact data is really critical. And we see a shift really occurring now, being driven, I think by probably two forces. One, a change in attitude on the part of investors who are becoming more sophisticated in their assessment of what ESG investing actually means. And secondly, changing regulation. If you're looking to create an Article 9 fund, for example, you're going to need to have a specific goal in mind, and impact data is going to be critical for that. The other impact that we've noticed, I would say, is really in retail investors who are becoming, more important in this space. Their demand for impact investments means that you need really good data, and not just good data, but good data that can be communicated in an easy to understand way. We're seeing a lot of changes there too.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And as context for everyone, obviously James is looking at this from a sort of perspective of a global player, but especially with the lens on data. And my second question also has to do with that. But obviously you work with a lot of customers, both on the retail side and institutional side. What kinds of, when you look at more sort of granularly into impact and ESG data, a couple of years ago, we just talked about ESG as one topic. Now we understand really there's a lot of nuances of looking at value creation, impact, ESG. So what kinds of data are your customers now most after?
Yeah, and just like there's lots of different types of ESG, the first thing I should say is that we serve lots of different client types all around the world. So requirements are, extremely varied. If I focus on Europe first, customers in Europe are really starting to understand their requirements that coming regulation requires of them. I think the majority of customers are in that space. And if I take an example of in the Nordics, so for our Nordic customers, we've been collecting ESG disclosures for about 600 companies, and we've been doing that for 3 years. But only really now in the last 6 months is demand for that data really starting to be there. Before that, there was a handful of customers that needed that information. I think raw data now is not enough. Customers want research, analysis, they want to benchmark, they want to measure impact. And all of that information is really not easy for our customers to find. And we really, work a lot with the people in our customers who are looking for data, very experienced people, and they find this challenging. So in many cases, what customers come to us for is they come with a long wish list of what they actually need. And we're trying to connect them with great data, be it from NASDAQ or from a third party. And then for more sophisticated investors, still talking about Europe, we're getting to a point where you need to go the extra mile on ESG if you want to differentiate, and that includes on data. There's really a rise in demand for more unique data, better quality data across a wide range of themes. And when it comes to impact data, investors are really starting to look at the different options and understanding how they can be measured. So that's a theme that we're talking to customers a lot right now. And then if I think more from a sort of global NASDAQ perspective, in the US, we know the journey has been a lot slower with ESG, but we've had a huge influx of questions and requests from our US customers, investment firms in North America, looking to integrate ESG into their strategies. And that's been a really positive development. And something that we sort of anticipate will grow even more.
Yeah, and I bet just coming back to some of the topics we're discussing earlier today, I think many of your clients might also be really struggling with making a coherent story, looking at the different lenses to impact. We just now briefly discussed the EU data compared to, for example, the SDGs. And obviously what you were looking for as an investor is somewhat of a coherent story of one company's impact, and not having to choose whose boat you're on. Like one lens could be saying this company is a great investment target. Another would be saying there's huge risk involved. And there's obviously a lot of good things for us to really learning to understand what this data means and what you have to also demand from the data. in order for it to answer a meaningful question. But I guess that also makes the game trickier for your customers as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Cool. I know the EU sustainable finance is not necessarily the largest topic on your table today, but since it is a very relevant topic for us in this session and all of the participants are struggling with it, how do you see that the new EU sustainable finance regulations will impact the ESG and impact data market and practices in Europe, if in any way?
Yeah, and I thought about this question. I sat down with my team and we sort of had a big brainstorm about it, and it ended up being quite a wide conversation. But I think we settled really on three things. So we think an increasing focus on impact investing. We think Article 9 funds will be in high demand, really as asset owners look to support a better world. And with that, impact investing is going to need to be evidenced, and there'll need to be strong data inputs, hitting precise goals, and that will drive the creation of the funds that have a really clear environmental or social objective. Secondly, we think there'll just be more and more data. As companies start to understand that getting access to capital from investors who are demanding ESG transparency is really dependent on them sharing their own data. I think we'll see a much wider availability of data and a lot deeper level of data. So that's fantastic. As I say, 600 of our listed companies out of around 1,000 companies, they already share data with us. But I would say, for the rest, that's going to become a must. And then finally, I think, ESG will continue to be more and more mainstream, and mainstream means more competitive. So having really good data is going to help firms win mandates. And that's because, everyone can access the most common data sources. You can all go and buy scores from the really common providers, but we think that, real experts in this space will be taking all kinds of data, including impact data, and to provide a more in-depth view. And in a crowded marketplace, you need everything you can to help stand out. And, that really starts with data. Yeah,
I would imagine that if nothing else, one really positive a consequence of the new EU regulations, as imperfect as they are and as they may even remain, is that it becomes mainstream. Every single organization needs to address them, needs to produce so that they get the data, and we get more and more brains to actually asking, what does this data answer? Because that, at least from our perspective, has been sometimes almost quite frustrating to look at. That sometimes people think that the more digits are there, the more exact this data might be, not even asking like, what kind of meaningful conclusion is this data point giving to any company stakeholder, whether investor or client or whatever. So that's something that I do believe that once we get more brains on this, the bar gets higher in a good way. Yeah,
absolutely. I totally agree.
Thank you so much, James, for commenting on these questions and to also joining this seminar. And I think this is looking at it more at the sort of broader, bringing the discussion from the details of the EU data points and towards the bigger picture of what are we actually all trying to measure here, and what does this mean for the global investing and business scene. Largely is also a great bridge to our next speaker. Who is Bart Adam, who is now, now I still have a typo on this slide, now the advisor to CEO at Securitas. So Bart is one of the people with whom I really enjoyed discussing about what kind of a role should holistic value creation have in financial reporting, if any kind of a role. And Bart is one of those people who has been turned to as a CFO, like, okay, so let's see the data, and has been in the role of needing to maybe look around his office as, do I have this magic closet where also the perfect impact data flies out? And Bart has very kindly promised to share his ideas as a final proper speech today, or presentation today, before talking about the next steps. So Bart, thank you so much for joining, and the stage is now yours.
Thank you so much, Anu. And could you allow me to share my screen?
I think, Tuukka, have you already given Bart the admission?
Yes, it should be in place.
Okay. Very good. Good. Then you should be able to see my screen now, if that is right here.
Yes.
Right? Good.
Yes. Excellent.
Excellent. Excellent. So yes, I'm very happy and honored to be here together with you today, and have been asked to provide you my views on what is described here on the screen as holistic value creation measuring as part of financial reporting. And to be honest, Anu, I felt almost a bit overwhelmed about this title, about this subject, but then luckily it says also a CFO comment, which I felt gave a bit of relief. As Anu rightfully said, I have been a CFO of Securitas until August 15, and now I'm a CEO advisor. We announced this already back in February this year. And the good thing about a CEO advisor, it feels like you get more time to think about the world than compared to being the CFO, actually. Anyhow, when preparing for this session, I was thinking about the following. We are so lucky to live on such a beautiful planet. But do we take care of our beautiful planet? Do we take care of what we have been given? And that shifted my mind to something else, which is called the overview effect. And the overview effect, that is what astronauts experience when they fly to the moon or out in space. And flying to the moon, as you can imagine, is of course an overwhelming mission by itself. But on their mission, when the astronauts then look back towards the Earth, they witness they are equally or even more overwhelmed by the view on our white and blue planet. And they are overwhelmed by both the beauty of our planet, but also by its fragility. And that is causing what they say a shift of awareness, according to the astronauts. And that is then what is called the overview effect. And now it's been 50 years since the Apollo 11 mission took 3 astronauts to the moon and back. And then what have we achieved in these 50 years? Well, I think we have achieved many, many, many great things. Things that we should be really proud about. And the development of the human race has been fantastic over the past 50 years. We could say easily that more important inventions and achievements have been made in the last 5 decades than in the preceding 500. But this also comes at a cost. I think it's fair to say that we have caused serious troubles to our planet, and we have not been able to solve the many disparities and inequalities that exist in the world. Now, and this is, of course, where sustainability comes in. And sustainability on United Nations definition is meeting the needs of the present while not compromising the abilities for the future. For me, sustainability means that as a human race, we shall take care of our planet and be able to live and develop together. That is what, for me, sustainability is in essence about. And now, before we go further on sustainability, of course, me being or having the CFO genes, I can never resist to talk about accounting. And I guess you're all desperately waiting for some accounting education here. Even more, I will talk to you about the history, actually, of accounting. The father of modern accounting is an Italian, and his name is Luca Pacioli. And our good friend Luca, basically in 1494, first described the system of double entry bookkeeping. And to put that a bit in perspective, that is actually 4 years after Columbus discovered the Americas. So now, 500 years later, you could say his work has developed into modern financial reporting. His work is the base for a universal financial reporting language called IFRS, and that covers the statement of income, the statement of financial position, and cash flow. This is a universal language of measuring financial performance, and then that supports, of course, globally well-known concepts such as organic growth, operating margin, EBITDA, and earnings per share. And that is really important. Creating this universal global financial language really contributes to keeping economical stability, trust, and cooperation. And those things are very important ingredients to the world development, stability, and ultimately, you could argue, to world peace. And I think really that the trust is the key word here. Why IFRS exists is to create trust in the financial system. And so based on this universal language for measuring financial performance, we can trust such financial reporting. I as a reader can trust that what you report is right, and I can have a correct understanding of what you are reporting. But we shall also be fair here. Creating this trust, well, it takes many accounting policies, accounting training, a couple of million accountants around the world. It takes accounting and reporting software. It takes auditors. It takes audit committees. And it takes quarterly reports to manage all of this. And this is about financial reporting. But let's now turn again to the subject of sustainability. Where are we when it comes to sustainability reporting? And in all honesty, this is a bit the feeling that I get in relation to sustainability reporting. And I used here the picture of a desert. And a desert is full of sand. It's a lot of sand in the desert, but still it gives you a little bit of an empty feeling. Where are we heading? That is also not that important to feel that in a desert. So to be honest, I feel a bit lost from time to time as a CFO. And for sure, people are looking on finance, and the reasoning is like, well, okay, since you can do financial reporting, you probably can also do non-financial reporting, right? And I shall say here, I don't like the expression non-financial reporting as a start. I think we shall ban that word forever. I think we shall talk about financial reporting next to sustainability reporting. And let me give you here a few of my observations related to my sustainability reporting feeling. I think, first of all, there is a very large ESG reporting gap today. Okay, yes, of course, I am with finance. So yes, we can do some reporting. We are specialists in that. Sustainability reporting, yeah, sure. But where are my guidelines? Where are my systems? Which KPIs to be used? Where are all my well-experienced sustainability accountants? I think we should have sustainability accountants like we have financial accountants. Where is my global standard? And even more so, and that has also been talked about before, where can I get the data? Which data are we looking for, and what makes sense to measure? I was reading on the website the other day, somebody was writing there, I have extensive experience in ESG assurance and ESG reporting. And I was thinking, shall I really trust this statement? I mean, the three-letter word ESG by itself exists for like 15 years only and has been commonly used since, I would not say, yeah, not more than 3 or maximum 5 years. How can anyone then have extensive experience? Another observation is, okay, let me give, yes, suppose then that you have the data, but then the other question is how to make the right interpretation out of the data, out of the sustainability reporting. So suppose that we can measure perfectly, but then how to make here the right interpretation. And an example from reality here is from at Securitas. We work with security technology, yes, but we also employ 350,000 people around the globe. And 85% of our people are employed as security guards. And yes, in security guards, we have relatively high staff turnover. But that is in our own eyes fine, because we give opportunities to young people that get their first job. And those young people, they stay for like 2 or 3 years. And these people get a good training. They learn how to take responsibility. And then they can move on to something else in life. And that's perfectly fine. That's a good contribution to society. And also on the other side of the spectrum, we also recruit a bit more senior people that sometimes have been terminated a few years ahead of retirement by other employers, and we give them a meaningful employment. So as these people stay a shorter time on average, causing relatively high staff turnover, for which in almost all ESG measurement systems, we get a very low ESG scoring. Whereas I think that by providing this meaningful employment, we really contribute in a very meaningful way to society. So one example of one KPI, staff turnover, where the data is one thing and probably pretty easy, but then what is the right interpretation after that? And a third observation is the following. Often when I think about ESG, I shall think also about the values that my grandmother was teaching me. And I find that if you try to follow what your grandmother was teaching you, my feeling is that you get most often actually closer to sustainable behavior. And now one of the things my grandmother was teaching me was the following. If somebody has come to work at your house and they worked well, those people shall be paid. Don't wait with paying their invoice for another 30 or 60 days. Don't do that. And I think reality is today that many corporates have beautiful sustainability wording on their websites. And to be honest, sometimes I almost get tears in my eyes. But at the same time, some corporates push suppliers to 90 or 120 or even 150 days payment terms. How sustainable is that? While the next day issuing green bonds. How shall we look upon that? I think sustainability foremost starts here with holistic, responsible corporate behavior. And how can we measure that? What is the way forward then? Is it just complaining? No, of course not. I'm truly convinced that we need something to measure truthful and holistic responsible behavior. Going back to the good old what gets measured gets done. And when it's measured, we shall be able to trust that reporting and have the correct understanding, just like with financial reporting. In the end, we will need a universal language of measuring sustainability performance, and that shall lead to global sustainability-alike concepts, to organic growth, EBITDA, and earnings per share. And it feels like that, at least I cannot imagine yet very well how these global sustainability KPIs will look like. But good old Luca Pacioli had no clue either when he invented double entry bookkeeping that one day actually the entire world would be talking about organic growth and EBITDA. I'm truly convinced we need something that is broad and holistic based on universal language, and just like with the global accounting language, a global sustainability reporting language that will contribute to keeping economical stability, trust and cooperation, very important ingredients to the world, but even more so important ingredients here to the livability of our planet. So we are very well familiar with financial reporting as a way to communicating the company's economic functioning in a relevant and faithful way, with the concepts which are well known as financial position, statement of income, statement of cash flow, and notes. And I think we shall in essence issue sustainability reporting next to financial reporting in a very similar way. And measuring this sustainability reporting, that will also start from a concept. Sustainability reporting, one could say, is corporate communication through which the company will represent its sustainability functioning in a relevant and faithful way, based then probably on a few statements that are the same all over the world, and I have invented some names here for these reports. And thereafter, this will likely require then, as with financial accounting, an entirety of sustainability policies, training, sustainability accountants, sustainability and reporting software, auditors, probably a sustainability committee next to the audit committee, and quarterly reports to manage this. And as argued before, we have quite a big gap to fill here. In many cases, we do not even have the data ready, nor the systems to gather the data. But the problem, though, as I see it, we do not have another 500 years. Especially, we all realize that when it comes to the E in ESG. Here, the clock is really ticking, and as companies, we cannot wait for the rule makers either. The rule makers are needed, but that will also require some time. Now, where are we now as CFOs? And as CFOs, we all struggle with this. And as I said, there is no time to lose here. So why I have tried to put up here a 4-step menu, what I think we should be focusing on as CFOs. And one is to start with purpose and strategy. Decide and tell your story, how you contribute and plan to contribute better. Second is materiality matters. It's no tick in the box exercise here. Be truthful and focus on what really matters to your company. Focus on where you can make a difference. 3, develop your organization with a multifunctional cooperation and in an agile way. It's not only the financial people that can solve this, far from. And truly believe in good long-term relationships and cooperation. And 4, relevant and faithful data. Measure your status and your progress, and be prepared also for a bit of a bumpy road and some turns along the way. We will have to do this in an agile way, and we have to make sure that our systems can also be adopted along the way. Because also, I think the rule makers will also adopt what they think is important. Which leads me to like one final but very important thought. Is there a smarter way to measure the sustainability performance? We know we do not have so much time here. How can we shorten the 500 years that were required to develop financial reporting? The clock is ticking and some urgency is required. And that is also why I'm so fascinated with what Anu and her team are doing. And I'm looking very much forward to learn more what they have in mind here. So as a summary, we need a global sustainability reporting language, but that will take some time. In the meantime, as a company, we shall implement, of course, the 4-step plan. We have no time to lose here. And then thirdly, is there a smarter, holistic way? Can we go faster by applying also what we have invented, like things like artificial intelligence? Can we apply this to this problem, which is a really important problem for me, for society, and for the world to solve? And it's at the end of the day, it's to be sustainable or not to be. I think this is a key matter here that somehow we need to solve. So that is, Anu, what I wanted to say and share with you today and with the audience here.
Thank you, Bart, so much. I love your overall drive and the story there. Absolutely wonderful. Especially love your part about grandma's teachings that are typically the ones that are right, and also your notion about the interpretation of the data, which I think is also beautifully ties together the whole topic of today. That it's not just the data points that we gather. You took the example of the employee churn at Securitas, which is not necessarily a very good metric, but it's rather how you interpret it and how you see what it actually tells you about. So thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. I'm looking at the time. We have a whole 6 minutes left. Toni, would you like to jump right through it and share with the participants the very concrete next steps after this session and what we are next looking at?
Happy to do so. I trust that you can see my screen now. So yeah. Let's go to the concrete next steps and the upcoming sessions as well. So as a next step for you program participants, we are kicking off the modeling work in September. So with some of you, we've already had the kickoff. With some of you, we will have them soon. Then we will jump into the production of data part, where we at Upright will take the lead on that. The details of the modeling work will depend on what type of, whether you are a corporation or an investor. And then throughout the autumn, we have these program sessions, which we'll show on the next slide. And then we will finish off the program in December. So we will have these 101 final workshops, but we will also have the closing seminar in December. So there is going to be a lot of stuff going on throughout the autumn. I'm truly looking forward to it. And then if we want to understand what are these next sessions about. So today we have had the kickoff seminar. Next up, we have multiple different themes coming up. So for instance, talking about the EU regulatory metrics for unlisted companies. I think there were some questions about those already in the chat. Then about getting the Article 9 classification for a fund, how to utilize the regulatory metrics, but also how to utilize net impact for that. Then also about reporting net impact and value creation, but also the regulatory metrics. And then the last session, we are selecting the topic based on participant feedback and needs and requests. No need to do anything about that at this point yet. I will let you know more about that later. And then a closing seminar in December. I will be sending out calendar invites to all of these sessions, but of course, if you want to, you can put these to your calendar already now, but no need because I'll send the invitations soon. But that's basically it. So getting started with the work in September, let's be in touch one-on-one on those. And then we have a lot of interesting sessions coming up as we go. So truly looking forward to that. But on my behalf, nothing more to add to that. So those were the next steps. Happy to get started, really excited. And then now I think we have 2 minutes left to wrap up. So I don't know, Anna, did you have some final words to share?
I have my 60-second wrap up, and then I'm going to leave you 2 minutes to get your next cup of coffee for your next meeting. So thank you everybody for joining us today. I think our goal internally at Upright was to create more questions than answers. And I think there were a lot of great questions, and we're recording all of them. Also, thank you for filling in the pain point sheet as well as we go. That's a great place to fill in the questions you would like to have addressed during the autumn. And as Tony said, he will be sending you some calendar invites, so no need to do anything about that proactively. A warm thank you, especially to Bart and Pekka and James for sharing your views, as well as all of you who commented and lent your comments throughout the way, like Therese and the rest of you. Please be active in raising the questions. I think this is a topic where we as investors and companies and data providers can do this well. It is up to the private sector to really determine how impact measuring reporting works. We're listening to EU, reacting to it, but that's not necessarily leading the game. So really look forward to rolling up our sleeves and starting to concretely produce this data for you guys, and look forward to a lot of great sessions throughout the autumn. Thank you so much, everybody, and look forward to catching up soon again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.